Are you going to read? Can you read it out? Can you read
קרוב ל-1,000 יהודים שגורשו מגרמניה, קיץ 1944, נרצחו כאן מאות גברים, יהודים ממחנה הגרמניה.
Actually, it was a labor camp. A labor camp.
Where was the camp?
The camp today it is part of Riga, and it is built over there.
Did we pass through it already?
You don't see there nothing.
No, but I mean, I just want to know.
It is not in our
in my
part.
mind where it is, you know.
It is not in our part of the city. We have to go.
Okay.
I'll speak of that.
You're going to go?
Yeah.
Yes, even the idea taken from when I start in Lithuania, then it is clear here, it is already everything clear.
Okay, here you see one of the ideas of that memorial, because we can say that all this place is a memorial, is on that pillar. First of all, you see here 1941, 1944, this is the wartime here, the Nazi occupation here. Okay. And here you see Magen David, yeah? And here I always ask people, what do they see in these things? What do you think?
6.
Menorah. Yeah, and
The 3 Baltic states?
I would say there are 6. Not
3 and 3.
Okay. But you are right that it is like a menorah also, if you look so. But also, since this is the massacre place, usually there was a fence around, yes, or death camps or concentration camps, and the fence of barbed wire, right? And how was the fence made? They shouldn't go over this way. So if you look, that's I at least
Very
see,
nice.
because it is, you know, everybody sees, and everything is correct.
Yeah.
What you think and there are no other, okay,
saying
something
it's-
incorrect. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I see at least that it is like that. And it goes along all this place. Like, it was 2005.
You're good, but you need a director. Direct him.
That was his first and last time.
So you see here, it goes like a fence, really. Yeah, 1 and 2 and 3 and then and then. Now you see here, the Nazis, the moment they occupy this land, they start the persecutions of the Jews, or shootings there in the ghetto on the spot and so on. But 45,000 Jews only in Riga. Then there are Jews that were brought here by trains from the Third Reich. Then there are the Jews that were taken from the surrounding little settlements or shtetls or villages and so on. At that time, shtetl existed. There were a lot of Jews in the shtetls. So they understand that they cannot do it on the spot. They cannot do by those Einsatzgruppen. Yeah? So they have to prepare to arrange a place, a massacre place, a mass massacre place, and this was one of them. Now, this place was designed by the example that already existed, and this was Ponar in Vilna, near Vilna, that we will be there. Usually when we start from Lithuania and go to Latvia, then it is easier to see because there. But now we go in the opposite direction, so I have to tell you a few words how was it there. There, the pits were made before the war, and they were dug for the oil storage by the in that interim period between the Lithuanian independence and Soviet regime. They already existed. The pits, they were for the oil storage, you know, for the big tanks, reservoirs. Such, yeah? Okay. So this idea they took here, and who was the designer, we can say, yeah, was Walter Stahlecker, that he was responsible for the Jewish extermination in whole this area, Baltic area. He designed this place. The project was taken to Berlin, to Himmler, head of SS. Yeah, he signed, and they started to bring here people. And so here are 6 pits. In Ponar they are round, and here they are rectangular. Okay. And as I told you already, there were 2 big, huge actions. November 30 and December 8, that over 20,000 Jews were killed by. What is this place? It's particular that it is the same as Ponar. It is next door to the tracks of the train. Railway tracks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And I always say that the sound of the train, going train, has some special sound for the Jewish ears. Right? It is always, at least for me, it is some feeling of a danger, of something that's going to happen. And you will see how close these pits are to that tracks.
I've seen in documentaries that after the war was coming to an end, the Nazis were taking people who had been buried and burning them.
Yeah.
So why didn't they do it here? Why did they just leave them?
I don't think there was time to do it. You're talking about the Nazis that were covering their tracks.
Yeah.
What they used to do, for example, in Ponar, they dug up the bodies and they put lime. They put raw lime on
No,
them.
but there were, that's what I'm going to say next, yeah, that in 1943, it was already after Stalingrad battle, the turning point in the war.
The Russians were
Okay.
coming.
They already, at least they are already moving to the west. Start moving westward. Okay. Himmler signed on an order that in the mass massacre places like Ponar or Rumbula or 9th Fort in Kovna, to dig out the bodies and to burn them. And this was also here, because they already feel what is going to happen. They want to hide the traces of their crimes, yeah. But there was one more idea, my mind. Because at the end of this, of his order was written, and to disperse the ashes. What does it mean? There is no place. Where is the bureau? Where are the graves? Where after the war, to say Kaddish, to put stones, to put flowers, if somebody wants, and so on. And that was the idea. And that was also the idea.
Julik, if I could just, So, if I could just give you maybe a bird's eye perspective of the massive forces that were going on from, let's say, the late 1930s until the final, the end of the war, which was about 1944. There were three phases in the Holocaust as I see it. The first phase was isolation. Jews were isolated in their communities. In other words, professors lost their jobs in universities. Doctors couldn't be employed as doctors. School teachers were fired because they were Jewish, right? So that was already affecting the economic conditions of the Jews, because once you can't feed your family, you're starting to lose confidence, you're becoming malnourished, and you are not seen any longer as one of the community. So people had lived in the Baltic states, Jews had lived here for 600 years, and all of a sudden there was a process that began of isolating them. It also culminated in many places where they wore the yellow star, right? And all of a sudden you were a non-citizen in your country. You could not leave because you didn't have a passport, you had no papers, but you were expected to live there. That was the first phase, which was isolation. And we'll talk in more detail about it as we move through the tour. The second one was ghettoization. So then you were asked to move out. So for example, as Julik was saying, you had the rich, the more wealthy people, you had the poorer people, and they were generally moved into poorer places in town. So for example, in Warsaw, you had the Jews that were collected from all over the city of Warsaw, and there were roughly 1 in 3 in Warsaw in 1941 was Jewish. Vilna and many of the Städte had a similar statistic, 1 in 3. Over here, if you're talking about okay, I'm going to come to that in a minute. So you're talking now about ghettoization, was where they were moved into, and what we saw there, as Julik was pointing out, when we went through the Jewish quarter, the ghetto, that was specifically selected, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it was specifically selected by the Nazis because it was a more compacted place. Several families were forced to move into one apartment. Can you imagine? There's no privacy anymore. Husband and wife can't live properly together any longer. And starvation starts to set in, and sickness. That is another way. There's poor sanitation, there's very little food. And then you've got your Judenrat, which is appointed under the most pathetic circumstances, where they had to now deal with food rations, where they had to deal with all sorts of decisions. And every so often, the Nazis would then say to the Judenrat, we want 1,000 people at the railway line at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And you're now sitting on the Judenrat and you're deciding which 1,000 people are going to be lining up on the railway station. So that was ghettoization. The same happened in Vilna, the same happened in many of the Städte. So that's ghettoization, moving into a small area, much too small for the amount of people that are supposed to fit into that kind of area in town. And then the third element is elimination. That was after Wannsee, the Wannsee conference, and where the final solution is taken, where they said now that it's not only that we want the Jews out of our society, it's not only that we've isolated them and put them into ghettos, but the final solution was when they wanted them to be put to death. And so the strategy was that once they are now ghettoized, and they're in a very small area, and there were police patrolling, there were walls that were put up, and in many cases it was the Jews themselves that were forced to put up the walls. As we've seen, there's still one piece of the Warsaw ghetto wall that's still standing. So then they were now isolated and in the ghetto, and then from there you had the links with the railways, which is what Julik was pointing out. Virtually every ghetto was next to the train track. So for example, the Jews of Warsaw went to Treblinka, and they went to a place that was right. The station was called the Umschlagplatz. There's even a memorial there today.
Trucks were made there.
Exactly. So then once they're in the ghetto, then you've got the Judenrat that is now forced to provide a certain amount of people each day to line up on the tracks, and from there, from the tracks, straight into the concentration camp. Why was Auschwitz such a huge killing center? Railway lines. I can show you maps, and you can see them, where virtually there were railway tracks from every country in Europe that somehow went through Auschwitz, and that's why Auschwitz was selected. First of all, it had the biggest East European Jewish community. How many Jews lived in Poland in 1941? 3.5 million. 3.3 million. In Lithuania, we've said 240,000. In Riga, approximately.
In Riga or in whole
Beg your pardon,
Latvia,
in the whole of
85,000?
in the whole of Latvia, 85,000, and in Estonia, about 30.
No, in
Even
Estonia
less.
much less,
Less.
and I will explain
We'll
you
discuss.
later
We'll
why.
discuss that.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to talk about what we saw at the beginning, 25,000 human beings, their bodies are here and in the places that Julik is going to. Now, what does that mean? 25,000 out of 80,000. That means roughly a quarter to a third of the Jews of Latvia are lying here. Now, like Michelle was saying to me when we were walking here, how do you get your head around a figure like 25,000? So when you're talking for the Jewish people, for those of us that come from South Africa, Lahavdil Elef Havdolas, King David School has 1,000 pupils in it, from the nursery school roughly through the high school, through the primary school to the high school. Lo Aleni, we should never make the comparison, but 25 King David schools, that's the amount of people that are here, and each person a human being, a world unto themselves. So it's very difficult, and I know many of us have come off the plane, and it's also very hard to kind of ground yourself. Well, this is a very quick grounding. But just to actually try for a minute, as we're walking through here, perhaps not to speak, just in deference and out of respect for the people that lie here, and to imagine that there are 25,000 people whose lives ended in these pits. And it happened very quickly. They were taken from the ghetto onto the transports, trucks and whatever else they could use, and brought here, and their lives ended right here. So maybe as we walk through the surrealistic forest where we can hear birds chirping and the leaves are green, just to begin to imagine for a minute the trauma, the anxiety with which these people met their ends over here.
Can I ask,
in
how
three
were they
or four
killed?
in Latvia is here.
By shooting.
By shooting.
And it was by shooting. The Germans afterwards saw that shooting was in fact a very inefficient way of killing people, because you need one bullet for one person, and that's when they moved towards the Zyklone B and the mechanical and industrial way of killing. This was not industrial. This was a bullet per person, and it was labor intensive. You had to dig the pits, you had to shoot people, the bodies were put in, they had to be laid out, and then the next went on.
It also
like
affected
this.
the troops.
But
It
that
also
they
affected the people who were killing, because they
and it affected the people that were killing, and I can tell you that many of the people that were killing were drinking themselves into in drunken stupor, many of them, and that kind of neutralized it for them. And at night they would play darts, they would entertain themselves, etc., while this was happening. Yeah, so in most cases the Jews themselves, they would get the younger, stronger men to come and dig the pit.
Yes.
And then they would line up the other victims that were brought in, women and children. They would shoot them, the bodies would fall in, and then they'd bring a next group of people, they would be shot and the bodies would fall in. In Ponar, for example, we were told that they would throw lime into the pits, which would help the decomposition quicker. And then, as Julie correctly said, towards the end of the war, when they were trying to destroy the evidence, Jewish slaves were brought in to unearth the bodies. They had massive, and these are all the trees. You can see the trees. They would cut down the trees and make huge log, sort of like a crisscross piles like this, with logs one on top of the other like that. And then the bodies would be in between each layer, and then they would put kerosene on top of the logs, and then they would burn it, and then they had to throw the ash back into the pits. That was to try and destroy the evidence. But as we know, the Americans advanced at a rate that was quicker than what the Germans could destroy the evidence, and that's why we had American soldiers and others taking photographs of the evidence before it could be destroyed.
see here that these stones standing, they symbolize, you see that it is in Magen David, right? Here. And this symbolizes the streets of the ghetto. This is the streets in the ghetto, Lakshmi Street and Yekapil Street. And the stones symbolize the houses here. You see the roofs? Okay, like a roof. Okay. And then the names of the people. Not just that they live together, but just names. And the burnt menorah. Okay. Not always it is good when the flags are here, because the impression is much stronger when there is nothing. Only the burnt menorah. Well, no. Let's first try this little bill and then we'll finish with this. Now here, this stone was put without this block, of course. Yeah? This is later. Okay? Was put in the Soviet time. Not everything was, absolutely wiped down and so on in the Soviet time. So nothing says about the Jews, but it is written in Yiddish, Die Carbones von Faschism, okay, 1941-44, and the Soviet symbol. This was put already after the independence, and not very correct that it is. This word is not true, not the only.
But at the time, was it the only
Who
one?
told me that was in Plungan? In Plungan, yeah?
we were
Yeah,
there
there was also in Yiddish, you
Yeah.
remember?
Yeah.
Okay. And these are the pits. Now let's walk a little.
Recording all the time.
see how close this fits out to the railway? And that was the idea, to bring straight to the top.
Oi. Oi.
Yeah, we couldn't have squeaked it.
I don't know. Never passed this. Thank God.
Couple walking here, like, walking through the
Yeah,
park.
they're all coming.
Are they aware of what
I think if they came here, they know
they
where
would
it
have?
is. And it's written there in Latvia and also in Russia.
At that beach?
Don't think that I arranged this train. No.
That was unbelievable.
They tried to vandalize this. They tried to vandalize this.
Never saw.
Never.
Never saw here. No. Here, never saw.
It's very beautifully done. Very peaceful.
Philip, what type of trees are these supposed to be?
These are pines.
Stone. Yes. That's the pine. This is
This
the pine.
pine. This is like poplar.
Poplar, yeah. Those are the pine. Yeah. Those were the logs. Yeah, the pine were the logs.
Some of them were like this, I think.
Yeah. Look. Yeah.
Well, these are old.
These are all.
They've been around for a couple hundred years.
The women were sitting, I've got photographs, and the women sat covering themselves in the freezing cold, it was July. Cold, trying to protect themselves in the stand up. But I'm saying in addition, can you imagine the suffering, the humiliation, the freezing conditions, and the hungry?